Hello, real estate professionals. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Agent Advantage webinar. These are brought to you by the Guaranteed Rate family of companies. My name is Kurt Klaus. Hope everyone is doing well. We appreciate all of you being here today with us. This month, we have a great, timely topic. I am sure you are all getting your business and your marketing plans together for the year. Title of today's webinar is The Secret to Successful Content Creation. We know the most effective way to grow your audience engagement and to improve your brand, to drive sales, to get referrals is content marketing. And our goal today is to help you with creating a strong content plan and creating strong content. Before we bring in our guest, and I see others are still logging into the webinar, a reminder that this entire monthly webinar series is part of the Agent Advantage website. All webinars are recorded and we archive these on the Agent Advantage site. If you're not already using Agent Advantage, it is our no-cost proprietary website. It is packed with features and benefits for our agent referral partners like you to help you look good, to help you grow your business. Our goal at Agent Advantage is to make your life easier and help you earn more money. There is a version of Agent Advantage for each of our three companies. Go to agents.rate.com for Guaranteed Rate, agents.grarate.com for our Guaranteed Rate Affinity Company, and agents.properrate.com for those working with Proper Rate. Agent Advantage has tons of stuff. It has a referral tool. It has a loan dashboard to view and track all of your deals in real time. It has an entire free CRM and marketing site that's powered by Total Expert with co-branded collateral, email campaigns, websites to help you with your listings. And it has a coaching section with top agent video series and all of our past webinars like this one. So go to Agent Advantage to create your free account. You can access all those tools and check out all of our past recorded webinars. We also have an Agent Advantage closed Facebook group. It is called Agent Advantage Insider. You can check that out to stay informed on everything we're doing here at the Agent Advantage team. It has real estate news, it has content, it has recorded webinars. You can go to Facebook, search Agent Advantage Insider, and request to join. Again, it's a closed group. Or you can scan the QR code there on your screen. That will take you right to the page. We put all of our maybe we can put our websites and that Facebook join group in the chat for everyone on the call so you can go there directly. So, okay, let's get rolling. So as a reminder, we do these webinars live, and that is so you can ask your questions to our expert guests. So please submit your questions in the chat question box. We'll save a little time at the end today to answer some questions live, and we'll be sure to reply with typed answers in that questions queue. So we are fortunate today to have our own very knowledgeable speaker to present our webinar, The Secret to Successful Content Creation. I would like to introduce John Thomas, our own veteran content expert here at the Guaranteed Rate family of companies. He is currently our Senior VP of Communication Strategy. John's background and past experience as a print, social, digital content creator, strategist, storyteller for the New York Times, for Cranes, for the Edelman PR firm, and Chicago Agent. So again, we're grateful for your time and for sharing your expertise with our agent audience. Hello, welcome, John Thomas. How you doing today?
Hey, everybody. Hi, Kurt. Very happy to be here. An incredibly important topic. As many people say these days, content is king. And it's it's probably no more true for an agent than, for any other business out there. And so what we're going to talk about today is really, the hows, the whys, the wheres, the whats, about a content strategy. We'll talk and lean into, strategy for people who are beginning to produce content, as well as people who are veterans at this, and really try to help everybody. But sort of give you a little bit of context, as Kurt said, um, I run content and strategic communications at Guaranteed Rate. Been here about a year and a half. Um, Spent most of my career as a journalist, longtime contributing writer at publications like the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. So I have a really good understanding of basically what amounts to consumer media, so consumer facing stuff. Also spent 2.5 years at Cranes, so I understand B2B. It's interesting, before I went to Cranes, I don't think I really understood B2B. And it was really important for these kinds of conversations because I understand what business owners are looking for and really need in a content strategy. Spent about a year at Chicago Agent. If you're familiar with that publication, it's really an amazing, Chicago-centric publication that focuses on agents. And I know that they have digital subsidiaries in cities around the country. But when I went to Chicago Agent, it really helped me understand the concerns and what agents are up against and what works and content that connects to them. So I think that was really important. And then right before I came to Guaranteed Rate, I was at Edelman for about 5 years. Edelman's the biggest PR agency in the world, and I ran sort of the in-house journalism shop at Edelman. So a lot of brand communications, which connects to a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So, before we get started, I'll touch a little bit on, my philosophy on why content is important. The main thing to take away is that, it helps you engage with the right people at the right time in the right way. And we'll talk a little bit about that, each, piece of that today, and we'll unpack it. But that's really, if you're communicating with the right people at the right time in the right way, you're winning in the content space. It also helps you control your own messaging and create your own brand. A lot of people throw around that kind of concept of personal brands. Some people don't think it's all that important. I actually think it's tremendously important, especially for folks who are doing the kinds of things that agents are. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. It allows you to differentiate yourself, which is incredibly important given the competition that's out there. And it also helps you establish yourself as an authority. And we'll also talk a little bit about what that means, and how to do that effectively. One of the themes I think that you'll see throughout this, this presentation, is that content for the sake of content is not necessarily a good thing. What we want to do is really figure out how to, communicate to you the importance of effective communication as opposed to communication for the sake of communication. So I also wanted to talk about a few examples of content that I think are particularly effective. And I think you'll see these on the screen as I describe them. My favorite feature when I was at Chicago Agent was this feature called My Style. I think it's an awesome feature. It's fun, it's personal. It allows you to plug things in the community like shops and boutiques. I know this is a Chicago centric feature, but I would encourage you, if there are publications or things like this where you are, to kind of lean into them. It's an interesting feature because I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this during this webinar as well. I'm not a big fan of putting a lot of effort into content that's kind of inside baseball or speaks more to the agent audience than the customer audience. But a feature like this, I think, does a lot of both. it speaks to the agent audience and allows you to communicate things to your peers. But it's also an amazing feature that humanizes you and shows who you are, and helps you establish that sort of differentiating personality. Um, the next feature is, it's what to avoid when getting a mortgage. This is the post. You're seeing a post from Guaranteed Rate Social. Um, this is a feature that I helped the site develop, and so this sort of leans into kind of the content plan and philosophy that we have at Guaranteed Rate. It's a practical story. It's an engaging story. It has a slight edge to it. And those are kind of themes that we'll talk a little bit about today as we talk about content. But this is a good example of the kind of content that Guaranteed Rate produced, so that we're leaning into practical things that people, who come to us are really interested in. The next feature is the best reasons to buy in the fall. That's a rate.com piece from our Knowledge Center, and we'll talk a lot more about our Knowledge Center moving forward and how you can use that and access it. But this piece about why to buy in the fall, it's practical, it's timely, and it drives business during traditional slow periods. And we'll talk more about that today, why that's important. And it speaks to inventory. One of the things that's really, really interesting from a content perspective in the housing space right now is inventory. Inventory is tight. So how do you lean into this tight inventory idea in ways that your customers and the people you're speaking to, want information and need information from you? The next piece is from Great Life. Great Life is a general interest content platform that's run by Guaranteed Rate. It's designed specifically for agents. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But this is a Great Life feature about water damage. It's an interesting general interest piece of content that speaks to a fear that a lot of homeowners have. And this is an example of connecting with your audience with general interest content, but that sort of has an organic connection to your relationship and potential relationship with these folks. And then the last piece of content I wanted to highlight is an award. I know that a lot of agents are really interested in awards and things that speak to their business. And I think awards are great. When I was at Chicago Agent, we ran lots of awards, and I think they're amazing programs. But some awards, I think, are better for the kind of content plan that we're talking about than others. And this is a great example of that. It's the National Association of Realtors Good Neighbor Award. And so I think this is the kind of award that if you socialize this kind of information, then you're letting clients and potential new clients know about something that differentiates you and humanizes you and talks about your work in the community, which I think things that are really, really important, as opposed to more kind of awards that speak to a little bit of inside baseball. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that's my background. There's some examples of content that I think are really interesting when it comes to things that you might want to spend some time looking at and figure out how that kind of content might inform your content strategy. So, Kurt, that's my background, and happy to chat with you more about all kinds of stuff like this.
Great stuff. And thanks for those examples. And
Sure.
I will kind of fire some questions at you. So, speaking to the agent watching that doesn't have one, like why, what is a typical content strategy plan look like? And repeat why it is so important for them to have one. Give an example of a specific strategy that they can put in place.
Yeah, I think that the key word is strategy. Because if you're making content and you don't have a strategy, then that's an enormous red flag. And the biggest reasons for that is you could put a lot of time, effort, and money into content creation and really get no return on your investment. One of the things that I've seen, in my experience and over the years is once you start that content operation, it can eat up time and money like you would not believe. And so if you're not thinking about it strategically and paying attention to it, and we'll talk a lot more about this later, then you're really just spinning your wheels. And what we don't want to do is create content that's making you feel good about yourself, as opposed to really accomplishing business goals. Another reason to have a content strategy is it's a great way to establish and promote your personal brand. And so if you're doing these things strategically and you're building content strategically, every piece of content is going to sort of ladder back to who you are and why you're different and why you're special and what you mean to your audience. The other thing is that if you don't have a content strategy, you're not going to be able to connect content creation with specific goals. And so specific goals are examples like, increasing a certain type of your business, or expanding into a new kind of business or a new area. So again, creating content without any kind of strategy behind it may look good, may feel good, but what we're really focused on is how do we create a content strategy that ladders directly and dramatically back to business goals.
Yep. And you mentioned tracking. So what do you recommend for someone and how they can look to track the success of the plan once they have in place? I know there's performance stats on social media sites, but how would you track and hit specific goals that you've put in place?
So monitoring and tracking is really interesting. I would suggest not getting too deep in the weeds, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. One of the things that I suggest is we're not advocating that agents become content publishers, publishing houses. What we're trying to do is give advice where folks can create the right kind of content to accomplish the right kind of business goals. So when you talk about tracking, I would monitor content, comments on social posts and comments on content that you're producing, because that really gives you a sense of how people are looking at it. That said, it's a really delicate balance these days when you're talking about comments. I've been in this business for a long time, and I can tell you that the people who are really thrilled probably comment a lot less than the people who are not so thrilled. So monitoring comments and seeing what the feedback is a great thing to do, but make sure that you're not taking too much from that. Another thing to keep track of is the new business that your content is sending you. That to me is really the most important thing that we'll talk about today. Is if you're producing content, what's the new business that it's sending you? Because that's the thing where in the real estate business, you really aren't engaging necessarily with an audience on a regular basis because people aren't buying a new house every single week. So what content are you putting out there that's bringing you in new business and new referrals? That's the biggest thing to track, in my opinion. Another way, which isn't necessarily all this very technical, but another way to track these kinds of things is when you get the right opportunity, ask your clients if they've engaged with your content and what they think. And so having a one-on-one conversation with someone who's had a really great experience with you, and this is another theme that we'll talk about during this presentation. If you talk with someone and they might tell you that they engage with a piece of content that is something that didn't take you a lot of time and effort, to create, as opposed to you spent thousands and thousands of dollars doing, this rich media content and so on and so forth, and they didn't see it. So when you talk to these folks, they can give you some really, really interesting feedback about what they engaged with and how they engaged with it. I also think, when you're talking about tracking, you really have to also think about managing costs and budget. And um, as for the budget and the time you commit to creating content, uh, you know, the most important thing is to be consistent. One of the things that I've seen, and I've seen it, with agents, with all kinds of different, folks, is if you flex in and out of a content strategy, it's really, really hard to drive value out of it. So if what can happen and what I've seen happen is people get really enthusiastic about content and they spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort and they put this content out there, and then the next week or the next month they really don't do anything. And so you really can't track the success of a content strategy and a content program unless you are consistent. um, it- you know so it's one of those things where I would advise being very, very consistent, and maybe not producing a ton of content, as opposed to being inconsistent and producing a ton of content, and then there's a long lag time and a long lapse between content production and content distribution. So that's the thing that's really, really important. And if you're putting a lot of time and effort into something that isn't paying off, like a YouTube channel or an email newsletter, stop doing it and try something different. It's interesting that in the last couple of days, I saw a loan officer, a Guaranteed Rate, had started a YouTube channel. And this person is an excellent, like, rock and roll guitar player. And so he's doing this rock and roll guitar, and in between the riffs, he's talking about mortgages. And it's like, this is amazing. I'm watching this thing and I'm like, this is incredible content. I can tell you right now, by watching it, took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money. And what I would tell this person is, that's amazing content, but be very careful to monitor whether this thing is pushing new business to you, because that's the thing that's really, really interesting here, is not that the content isn't great and fun and engaging, but is it accomplishing your business goals?
So to follow up on the time and budget, John, so how much time can an agent expect to spend on executing this plan? I'm sure some bigger teams may have a dedicated person, but for a solo agent, what is the time commitment? And then maybe speak on budget, everything, social being free and having a budget, and spending more money on something more elaborate.
Yeah, it's a great question. You're right that there are agents out there who have operations, where they can lean into people, to help them with this kind of thing. If you're a solo agent, I think the way to do it, or the way to really wrap your head around it, is it's very front loaded. So you're going to spend a lot of time in the beginning creating the strategy. And I think that once you get that strategy down, it's not as much effort on a regular basis, from the standpoint of content creation and content distribution. Um,
Mhm.
so, uh, time, I would think that a solo agent, if you're putting in a couple of hours a week, that would make
Mhm.
sense to me. From a budget standpoint, it's really hard to put a dollar figure on it, especially because one of the things that I've seen are, if you're really smart about it, you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money. Um, if you're finding things like, as an example, Guaranteed Rates Knowledge Center and Great Life, you can find content, that other people have created that you can distribute and connect yourself to. That said, I could see investing a few $1,000s potentially on a video, for you and your business that establishes who you are and what community you serve. And so that can be kind of expensive. One of the things that if you decide that you're going to invest the money in something, in a rich media asset like a video, really the biggest thing to pay attention to is taking that time and effort and money and getting multiple pieces of content out of it. A super short form thing for social, a more long form thing for your own website, that kind of thing. So you're not going in and spending all this time and effort and money, and you're just getting a single asset out of it.
Yeah. And speak on what specific channels that I should consider to show my content on today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is fairly straightforward. Definitely on your own site,
Mhm.
and on your own site. And this sounds kind of obvious to say, but pay really close attention to your own bio and your own story. Something that I've seen a little bit interesting recently in the industry, sort of paying attention to these kinds of things, is you'll go to someone's site, be it a loan officer or an agent, and there's a lot of bells and whistles and interesting content and so on and so forth. But the very basics about who this person is and why you would be interested in doing business with this person, that hasn't been given as much attention and focus as sort of the really kind of fancy things like that. So really, really pay close attention on your own site to establishing, who you are, and why, and what your connections to the community are, and why someone would really naturally want to do business with you. Goes without saying, social is a must.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find most interesting about social is that there are so many channels out there. Real estate is a very visual, business, and things like Instagram and things like that are definitely ways to lean into it. But I would be really careful. So when it comes to social, try to be really honest with yourself about what the social platforms your business, and the people you want to do business with are paying attention to. Be honest with yourself, and
Yeah.
if the people you want to attract are not necessarily on the hip new social
Yeah.
platforms, then don't necessarily lean into that. And then the last channel, and this channel may seem old fashioned and boring, but I have to say that a content strategy that includes direct mail is really, really smart. I have to say that me personally, I pay attention to direct mail things that I get from agents all the time, and it's not cheap. It's an investment to do this.
Mhm.
Content strategy should definitely have a direct mail component to it. And I understand that direct mail doesn't necessarily have the ability to tell a huge story. You're communicating in a fairly short way. But if you have some amazing thing that you've accomplished in your business, or something really new and different, include that or consider including that in direct mail communication.
Yep. Great point. My takeaway when asking like the what and the where is to start with your audience and kind of target it towards your audience. If it's a young demographic, what are
Yep.
they watching? If it's older housewives community, where are their eyes?
Yep.
So
Just be honest with yourself, because again, the one of the mistakes that you can make from, a content strategy standpoint is, is the content making you feel good, or is it making your audience and your customers feel good?
yeah. What's your opinion on? I'm sure it's a mix, but the personal versus the business. You see, some people it's all personal. You gave a great example of one, but in some it's just nothing but business and listing and rates. But your opinion on mixing or having a personal page versus a business page, maybe.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the real estate agent business is a personal
Yeah,
business. And so, and I think personality matters.
yeah,
And so I definitely think that showing things that really establish who you are and what your personality is really important. But what's interesting is what you just said about some agents are doing this and some agents are doing that. Um, if you're doing something that isn't necessarily very personality focused and it's working for you,
yeah,
that makes sense. So it's all about testing and tracking. If you're doing something that shows a lot of personality and so on and so forth, and you're not getting a lot of engagement, then you really should take that to heart and then take that back to your content strategy and push it in a different direction. So do I think the personality should be a big part of it? Absolutely,
yeah.
personality should be a big part of it. But again, the real way to figure out what's right and what's wrong and what the balance is how is it benefiting you?
Yeah. I always think we get bombarded with so much today. What I would find interesting or what I would open or what I might think is just boring. And on that point, with so much coming at everyone, any tips or ways to help someone really stand out or be eye catching to get engagement? Anything you're seeing people doing today to really set themselves apart?
You know, I, it's interesting. Well, first of all, you're talking about volume. Um, and so just to touch on that for a second, volume is interesting because if you're communicating so much that people are beginning to tune you out, you really, really have to pay attention to that. And so if um, your content strategy really, really needs to understand the volume component. And so always make sure you're understanding that if you're going to market with something, um, and it's not connecting and it's not working, then pull back on that volume, because then you're going to be able to concentrate in other parts of your business. Um, so you're talking about how to differentiate yourself and how to make yourself special and things like that. So my advice on there is, if you specialize in something, double down on communicating about that and creating content around that. Maybe you do a lot of work with veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure people know that. Maybe you know a certain neighborhood better than anybody else out there. Get that word out. One thing that we haven't talked a little bit about is um, enlisting others to help you show how you're special and different. And so a lot of people, I think, I think people might not think that testimonials are part of a content strategy. I think, especially in the agent business, that testimonials are a great part of the content strategy. And so, figuring out how to get other people to say how great you are is I think should be a consistent part of a good content strategy. If you're involved in work that benefits the community, I would stress that that helps you stand out.
Yeah.
If you sell homes that are particularly noteworthy, find out how to leverage and promote that. Visuals obviously work really, really well. If you're involved in a project that you think a lot of people would like to know about, even this is one of those things where, even though connecting with these people might not be driving you a ton of business, if you're connected with something that has general interest, get the word out there and stress that. um, Promote yourself as an expert. One way to do that is, develop content around, your expertise, but then maybe have like office hours or something like that. So your content connects to something very direct and personal with you. And then, use data points that people care about. the number of people you've put in first homes, the number of
Yeah.
homes you've sold in a particular neighborhood, that kind of thing.
Right. All great. And there's nothing wrong with asking your promoters or your close clients for a referral or a statement on how the last transaction went. So love it. So you talked about consistency, John. Can you speak on, if you're an agent, is it creating a set content calendar with time and actions each day or each month, and then maybe also add, for a real estate agent, the cycle of an agent's business and how to time or create your content based on the cycle of a realtor's year.
Yeah, a content calendar, is really interesting. Um, I think that it's absolutely important, but I think in the very beginning of developing a content strategy, I think it's something that evolves, because the best way to do this is sort of incrementally. So create content, see if it works, double down on it if it works, pull back on it if it doesn't work. Um, so as you develop this, I think you'll get a sense of the cadence and the calendar and those kinds of things, and probably X number of months in, you'll get into a really good rhythm, and you'll begin to see trends like, I did this, and this is the kind of engagement and feedback I got, and impact, and so on and so forth. So creating a content calendar is an interesting thing. I would advise on, as I said before, consistency is a lot more
Yeah.
important than having a robust content calendar for a month and then getting so busy that you're not going to have any kind of a content calendar moving forward. And that really connects to this idea of seasonality. Um, Content production and content calendars and content are really, really difficult things to do. And so I would say that there's a baseline level of consistency when it comes to content. But what's interesting is that the the real estate business is by nature right now a very seasonal business, and people understand that. And so I would suggest maybe leaning into content creation and content production a little bit more in the times where things are slow for you, than the times where for a fact you're just not going to have the time to do justice to this kind of content. So one of the ideas of a content strategy is, maybe on a yearly basis, you create video content that you roll out throughout the year. But that from a content strategy standpoint, December is a month that you'll be able to spend an enormous more amount of time on content, because your business is slower than it is in, say, March or April. Um, so it's interesting. At Guaranteed Rate, from a content standpoint, we developed a bunch of features over the last year or so that really kind of speak to the evolving seasonality of the real estate business.
Mhm.
And what I find really interesting is that, because the market is so tight and because inventory is so low, things that are a little bit non-traditional, which is like buying in the winter and buying in the fall, are really, more viable, than than they used to be. And we created a lot of content over the last year around this kind of phenomenon, and the content did really, really well. So what does that mean for agents, and what does that mean for an agent's content strategy? Um, don't try to overwhelm yourself with content creation and production, and even content strategy, when you know that your business is firing on all cylinders for, from month, X to month Y. when you know that you have downtime and you think, I would say, from a seasonality standpoint, if you know naturally you're going to have more time to do these kinds of things, experiment with content during those periods and see if you can drive new business and so on and so forth. So seasonality is really interesting. It's a natural part of the real estate business. So what I would suggest is, how do you use the natural seasonality of the real estate business as a way to really maximize your content and your content strategy?
Yeah, great. Wanted to bring up video while we have you, and so popular, and agents are intimidated to do it, but today you can just use your phone. And I've seen from walkthroughs to listings to walkthroughs of communities to, talk about including your personality, but maybe some ideas or some ways that agents can leverage video and include it in their content strategy.
Yeah, video is really really interesting. I have some, personal experience in using like in phone apps to edit video and create video, and they're really good. If you're like terrified of this, try and experiment, because people these days have the ability to create video that's relatively professional straight on their phone. And so spend a little time doing that. If you have the money and you have the time, and you want to hire, professional videographers and so on and so forth, I think that's great, and that stuff can really pay off. I will say that video, I mean, video is just exponentially more expensive than just about anything, and so I'm a big fan of video as part of a content strategy. But if you do video and you see that it's just really not driving business, or it's really not doing what you want it to do, be honest with yourself and admit that, okay, everybody's telling me I have to do video and I have to do video as part of my content strategy, but it's just not. There's no ROI for me on this video, and that's okay. I mean, different approaches are going to work for different folks. So that said, simple video, short form video, that connects, to your audience and your business goals, I think is something that you can experiment with. Maybe there's something that's happening in your community that you could, that you're a part of, and you can do video and post that. But again, video is interesting because you can post it and see what the reaction is and see if it's driving any business. And if it is, great, do more of it. And if it's not, try different things.
And can you share, you mentioned some apps or any other technology that agents can go and check out off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be quite honest, like something as simple as an iMovie app, on your phone, that's the kind of thing that I've used. And what's interesting is, I fumbled around with mine for 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is a lot more simple than I thought. So I think any of those, relatively straightforward, general interest apps, that you can get on your phone are all pretty effective. And it's all high resolution stuff.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is, experiment with those kinds of things, and try some short form video on your social channels and see how people react to it.
Yeah. Just do it. It doesn't have to be produced. It just has to be real. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. Anything at minimum for an agent that is watching and they're doing nothing? So what is kind of the must do here when they're thinking about the upcoming year that they should be thinking about to push out, or maybe get started with diving into this?
Yeah, again, I think that a lot of people are going to, and I've said this before, if you're interested in a real estate agent, you're probably going to go to that person's webpage. And so if you're checking off boxes, the first box is, what is, because we had talked a little bit about this earlier. I mean, what's that first impression? The first impression is someone coming to your webpage and seeing you, and if that's a mess, and if it's not very engaging or interesting, or says, how you're special or different, or how long you've been in the community, that's the thing. It's like, what is that very, very, so ask yourself from a content strategy standpoint, ask yourself, if you're an agent, if I'm a potential customer, what is the very first thing, the very first place that someone will naturally connect with me? And that might be a little bit different for different agents, depending on what your social presence is, or, if you're part of a larger group, or that kind of thing. So ask yourself, what is the very, very first way that someone who's looking for me would interact with me? And then go to that place and take a look at it. If you're talking about like the very, very musts of a content strategy, that's the very, very first thing to focus on a content strategy is, what's that first impression? Not what do I want the first impression to be, because that's very, very different. It's, what is the natural first impression from someone who's just out there in the digital space is going to find me? That's the thing you really need to tighten up.
John, you mentioned a couple spots that you can go and get content: rate.com/research, greatlife.rate.com for some lifestyle content. Any other sites or sources that you can share that have great content that agents can look at and take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I'll sort of plug again these two, because I think they're really good examples of content you can find that you can share. And so what's interesting is, we sort of live in a kind of like, people share content a lot more than they actually create content. Yeah. And so that's one of the things to really, keep top of mind in a content strategy is, if you can be the one who is sharing content that your audience is really interested in, that means that you don't necessarily have to spend the time and money to actually create it. And so what you want to do then are find some places that aggregate the kind of content that you're interested in, that your audience is interested in, and then sort of share that and be the person who shares that content. The Knowledge Center, as well as the Research Center at Guaranteed Rate, is really interesting. And we create a content really designed to do exactly what we're talking about, with thousands of articles about the home buying process, general interest content, and timely content, and stuff that's really searchable. We also talked about Great Life. I gave an example earlier about Great Life, and you can find sites like Great Life that have engaging general interest content, and it's easy for agents to share. So one of the most important things is making sure there's a reason to share content. And what I mean by that is, make sure you're establishing a kind of organic connection. And a lot of the content on Great Life, if you spend a little bit of time sort of going through it, connects to things like holidays and events and seasons and things like that. Before this presentation, I was going through Great Life, and I was thinking, what might be an interesting feature for a real estate agent from Great Life to share. And I found this feature on the joy of heated floors in homes in the dead of winter. And it's like, I'm in Chicago and it's, 0 degrees outside. That's the kind of thing where, you're not sending something about the baseball winter meetings. You're sending content that connects to what you do professionally and that what your audience might be interested in. content, pay attention to local content creators. Things, pay attention to things that are happening in your city and your neighborhood, and share the news about things like that, restaurant openings and cool new events. If let's say you really focus on a certain neighborhood and like a super incredible cool new restaurant open, that to me, if you went to eat there, that's the kind of thing where if you shared it, that makes perfect sense. It's like you work in this neighborhood. This is an amazing thing about your neighborhood, and you're sharing it, and as opposed to sharing something that's news just for the sake of news, which connects to this idea of, if you start sharing things from major outlets like, say, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, people might not be looking for you as the person who should be sharing this kind of general interest news. So be really careful about that. And then when you're finding these sites to consider about, where you're going to integrate content sharing into your strategy, be a little mindful about content that's inside baseball in terms of, the real estate agent business. Because again, content that might be interesting to you and your colleagues may not be particularly interesting to the audience that you're trying to reach and connect with.
Yeah, I love the tip to keep it hyper local. A realtor friend of mine, her most engaging posts are favorite dessert in the community, best place to buy shoes in the community, and you're not only plugging local businesses, but you're speaking of the community that you're an expert in. Love it. So in closing, kind of any don'ts as well as any must do's as agents sit down and think about the rest of the year and what they can do to improve their content game?
So these are the things that I think are the most important when it comes to a content strategy. I've said this a lot during this presentation, and that's be consistent. If you go out with a lot of content and then you stop and then you go out, you're really not going to understand the value of the content strategy. So be really, really careful and be consistent. Another way to think about that is this idea of, and I'm a big fan of this, is fewer, better. Mm-hmm. Fewer, better makes a lot of sense. And this also helps if you're strapped for time and money. So the idea of fewer posts that are better, that connect more, is a better content strategy than more content posts that don't necessarily have the kind of impact. So keep in mind this idea of fewer, better. Another thing is, because I think a lot of this presentation we've been talking about the idea of like people who might not have a content strategy yet, leaning into a content strategy. Mm-hmm. For the folks who already have a content strategy, I would suggest, if you've never done an audit of your content strategy, now's the time to do an audit of your content strategy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've seen, as a writer and an editor and, someone who's run newsrooms before, when you do a content audit, one of the things you'll find is that you're putting a lot of time, you'll discover you're putting a lot of time and effort into content creation that isn't paying off. And if you stop doing that, you'll have the time, effort, and money to put into new things that might pay off. So right now, at this time of the year, a content audit for someone who's been doing content for a while makes a lot of sense. Again, be really wary of hip new social platforms and putting a lot of time and effort into them. It might work for some, but it doesn't have to work for everybody. And then, and I've said this before, this kind of like insider information, be wary of putting all your content into promoting yourself in places that only other agents pay attention to. It's important, but really what you want to do is be visible, in places that customers care about, and creating content and having a content strategy that's customer centric as opposed to sort of agent centric.
Love it. Start with the audience and craft it towards them. Perfect. So, and let's see if we have any questions from the audience, we can take time to field some live questions. I'll read a couple of questions and we can get John to answer.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much, everyone, for joining our webinar today. Congratulations to you for making an effort to learn and improve your business. I want to give a big thanks again to John Thomas. John, thanks for being here and for sharing your insight.
Thank you so much. It was great. And it's something that I naturally know a lot about and I think can be really helpful if done in the right way.
Awesome. We can be reached here at Agent Advantage. Our email is agents@rate.com. If you want to email us with any follow-up questions or any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. On behalf of the entire Agent Advantage team, again, I am Kurt Klaus. Thanks again for being here and have a great rest of the day.